everybody ready? Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We're here today to make good on a commitment to save lives in this city. We'll sign the legislation to lower the default citywide speed limit to 25 miles per hour. Starting November 7th, this November 7th, 2014, the speed limit throughout New York City will be 25 miles per hour unless otherwise noticed by a sign. Unless there is a sign specifically saying otherwise, from November 7th on, 25 miles per hour will be the speed limit in New York City. It's a key component of our Vision Zero plan to end traffic-related deaths and injuries. Now, we've talked a lot about Vision Zero over the last 10 months. It is a centerpiece of the work of this administration. It is a crucial part of our efforts to keep the people of this city safe. And we strongly believe that death and injury from vehicle crashes is not only unacceptable, it is avoidable. That is the core notion of Vision Zero, and that's what we're proceeding to act upon. There are a number of people I'd like to mention, but the person I'd like to most mention today is Teresa Pedroza, who is the grandmother of Deshanae Santana. And the reason we're here at this site is that Deshanae was, in January 2012, crossing Delancey Street, just going about her business, crossing this busy street. She was struck while walking home from school, and we lost her that day. 12-year-old girl with a bright future, lost because we didn't at that time have the kind of restrictions in place we needed. You know, I just crossed Delancey Street, and a couple of young ladies from the neighborhood were crossing at the same time, and they said to me, look how quickly you have to cross the street just to get across safely, because it's such a long street and the lights only give you so much time. We have to do a lot of work to fix conditions like this all over the city, and that is the core concept of Vision Zero, to systematically address each and every one of these challenges. And we believe that the more we do that, the more that young ladies like Deshanae and people of all ages will be saved. We believe it can be done, but it begins with reducing speeding, because in so many of these situations where we've lost people, speeding was the core cause. And before I go on, I'd like to mention some of the people who are here today in support of this initiative. I want to thank them all. I want to thank the chair of the Taxi and Limousine Commission, Meera Joshi, for the fantastic work she's doing on safety. I want to thank elected officials who have been supporting our efforts. You know, this has been an effort that required a lot of help in Albany, as well as here at the city level. So I want to thank State Senators Brad Hoylman, Martin DeLon, and Daniel Squadron. I want to thank our colleagues from the City Council, Vanessa Gibson, Margaret Chin, whose district we have the honor of being in, Andy King, and Adonis Rodriguez, for all of their support. The numbers are striking. Last year in New York City, 291 traffic fatalities. 291. That's almost as many people lost to traffic fatalities as were lost to murder last year in New York City. Approximately 4,000 people injured last year in traffic incidents. Being struck by a vehicle is the second leading cause of injury-related death for seniors and is the leading cause for children under 14. So it's unconscionable to let this status quo continue. We knew we had to act, and we're acting more intensely with each passing month to address this problem. There are families with us today, and they've been with us every step along the way. I talk about them every time because they've suffered an unimaginable loss. They continue to feel pain, but they have turned that pain into action. Their willingness to tell their stories, to go all over this city and state, to educate lawmakers, to create urgency is part of why we are standing here today. And their efforts have paid off for so many New Yorkers who will be saved. We'll never know the names of the ones who were saved because of the changes that these families helped to achieve. But it is an extraordinary tribute to their loved ones who were lost that they have helped to save other people's lives. Already this year, we've seen evidence where the Department of Transportation has already made major engineering changes. We've seen this over the last few years where they made these changes, fatalities are down substantially. And as of last Thursday, citywide pedestrian fatalities were down over 20% from the same point last year. Overall fatalities, traffic-related fatalities, down nearly 7% from the same point last year. Vision Zero has just begun, but look at that progress. Pedestrian fatalities down over 20% from just a year ago, with just the measures that have been instituted so far and many more to come. Of course, it's not enough until every measure is put in place. But as I said before, data shows time and time again, speed is the core culprit. And when we get drivers down to 25 miles an hour or below, we greatly increase the chance of anyone surviving a crash. When drivers are driving below 25 miles an hour, it gives them much more time to avoid crashes, gives drivers and pedestrians more time to see each other, greatly intensifies the opportunity to save lives. And here's a fact that is quite striking. Pedestrians struck by cars traveling 25 miles per hour are half as likely to die as those struck at 30 miles per hour. So it's very important that we understand this change in just 5 miles per hour makes a fundamental difference in people's lives. Now, lowering the speed limit, again, central to the Vision Zero plan, but not the only component by any stretch of the imagination. We're committed to re-engineer and redesign 50 intersections and corridors over the course of this year and each year. We're stepping up enforcement against dangerous moving violations like speeding and failure to yield to pedestrians. There are new slow zones and speed bumps. There's a huge public outreach campaign. You'll hear from some of my colleagues about how that's being done, and even, as Chief Chan just pointed out to me, even how NYPD vehicles are part of spreading that message. And there's legislation to increase penalties for dangerous drivers. So all of these different pieces will come together to build the Vision Zero plan. But in the end, Vision Zero is not just about the technical changes we make or the legal changes we make. It's about changing behavior. It's about changing the way we think and how we act towards each other. People get behind the wheel, they take other people's lives in their own hands. We want to help everyone who drives to understand their responsibilities. We want all bicyclists, all pedestrians to understand their responsibilities as well. We all have our lives in each other's hands. Vision Zero is about helping people understand we can do something about this challenge. We've shown, in terms of fighting crime, we've made New York City the safest big city in the world. We're going to deepen that work when it comes to traffic as well. We're going to make it the safest big city of the world in terms of traffic too, because that's what we need to do to protect our people. Just a few words in Spanish. Hoy estamos dando pasos para hacer de Nueva York la ciudad grande más segura en el mundo. A partir del 7 de noviembre, el nuevo límite de velocidad en toda la ciudad será 25 millas por hora, a menos que avisos oficiales digan lo contrario. Esto va a salvar vidas. Estamos trabajando para construir una mejor y más segura Nueva York, y para ello necesitamos la ayuda de todos. With that, I'd like to introduce someone who's really been one of the great architects of the creation of the Vision Zero plan here in New York City. She has done extraordinary work. Her agency is at the front line of helping us to be safer every day. Our Commissioner of Transportation, Polly Trottenberg.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Mayor de Blasio, for your leadership and commitment to Vision Zero. It is so important to DOT and our sister agencies as we implement the new citywide 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. I also want to thank Speaker Silver and the leadership in Albany, Speaker Mark-Viverito, Chairman Rodriguez, Councilmember Greenfield, and all the council members and the families and advocates who are with us here today. 50 years ago, on October 1st, 1964, the 30-mile-an-hour default speed limit took effect throughout New York State. Earlier in the year, the New York State Legislature had actually raised the statewide speed limit from 25 to 30 over the objections of the man who was my predecessor 50 years ago, Traffic Commissioner Henry Barnes. So for 50 years here in New York, we've endured excessive speeding on our dense residential streets. With this history in mind, it's so nice to be here today having a chance to right this historical wrong and lower the speed limit back to 25 miles an hour. And as the mayor said, this is an important moment we're taking today to remind everyone this will go into effect on November 7th. To get the word out, DOT is running a public awareness campaign, 25 days to 25 miles an hour in the 5 boroughs. We will be installing new gateway signs at the entrances to the city and off of major highways and bridges. We will also be installing or replacing 3,000 signs at limited access highway exits, arterial slow zones, and other corridors where there are high crash rates. Next, we're also going to have a citywide 25 miles per hour public awareness day on Thursday when DOT and the NYPD will work together to distribute literature to thousands of motorists. In addition, as you're driving around the city, hopefully you're already hearing about the new speed limit on the radio, on variable message boards, and we're partnering with some important groups like AAA, Transportation Alternatives, Geico, and Edison Parking to help get the word out. We're also going to work with the NYPD as we put signs around the city to make sure we're putting them in places where they can be most effective for enforcement. And lastly, we're in the midst of a social media campaign. Each day we're highlighting a different New Yorker and how this law change will affect them. Today, actually, we're highlighting our council chairman, Adonis Rodriguez, who's been such a great leader in supporting this legislation both up in Albany and here at the City Council. Lastly, just as the mayor said, I too want to thank the families and advocates. Their passion and the commitment that they have brought to getting us to this day where we've been able to lower the speed limit has been just inspiring for all of us. And I want to thank them and the mayor for their leadership.
Thank you, Polly. You know, even before I named Bill Bratton Police Commissioner, he was speaking out on the fact that the NYPD needed to focus on traffic fatalities and make that central to the fight for public safety. He has brought a tremendous energy and vigor to that effort, and he named someone to lead these efforts who has really been a forceful leader. Chief Tom Chan has taken the Vision Zero concept and made it real throughout the NYPD. He's been all over this city, spreading the word about the different approach we have to take, but also making sure that the enforcement is there. And I know New Yorkers have seen and appreciate the fact that things that used to be ignored now are acted upon in a very energetic manner, and we have Chief Chan to thank for that. I'd like to bring forward Chief Chan.
Good morning. I'd like to thank Mayor de Blasio, the Council Speaker, Council members Rodriguez and Gibson, and the many legislators and elected officials for their support. Commissioner Trottenberg, Commissioner Joshi, and their respective staff who have been invaluable, and I'd like to thank them as well. The 25-mile-an-hour speed limit will save lives. We thank the members of Families for Safe Street for their dedication and their commitment. As the safest big city in the nation and the world, it's time to extend the safety to our city roadways. Speed is a leading factor in traffic fatalities across our city. Adhering to the speed limit will decrease the probability and the severity of injuries and damages to your vehicle. The New York City Police Department will endeavor to work on education and outreach with our partners in the Department of Transportation and the TLC. Working with our partners and our vision coordinators in each of the 77 precincts, we will utilize the police officers, the community affairs, auxiliary officers to engage the motoring public and to distribute flyers to our motoring public. The commands will reach out to both precinct community councils, civic organizations to get the message out. Through our public information office, social media outlets, the Department of Vehicle website, we will promote the message of the 25-mile speed limit. the Community Affairs Bureau will send out an email blast to its 51,000 contacts. Our School Safety Division, along and working with the Department of Education, will generate take-home messages to all our students. Portable variable message signs will be deployed along with the Department of Transportation throughout the city to get the message out to our motorists. Behind us is the Vision Zero van. That vehicle has audio and vehicle VMS capability, and they'll also get the message out to our motorists as that there is a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. Currently, the New York City Police Department has 2,600 vehicles with VMS capability, and that speed limit will be added to their signage also. Our enforcement, we will be working very closely with the Department of Transportation with their speed cameras. Our officers will be out there, and they are prepared on November 7th to do the enforcement. We'll be looking at the motorists. We will not be targeting that individual going at 21 mile over the speed limit, 26 miles, 27. But we definitely will be out there, and certainly that we hope that we don't have to issue the summonses. But again, the officers, the NYPD, will be prepared to enforce the new speed limit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to give you an example of the chief's leadership, thank you very much. You know, a few weeks after we started the Vision Zero effort, one of my colleagues from the city government was in a cab on the Upper West Side, and the cab got pulled over by a police officer. And she said that she was very struck by the fact that the officer took the time to explain to the cab driver not only what he had done wrong, he had failed to yield to pedestrians, but why it was important to the safety of the city. And that police officer played a role educating that cab driver about why we had to think a different way. So I want to commend Chief Chan because, again, it's enforcement and education, and under his leadership, NYPD is playing a crucial role in both. Now, in terms of the speed limit, again, as so many of you know, this was something where we needed help from Albany. And lives were on the line. Had we not been able to achieve this victory this year in Albany, we would have gone another year without one of the tools we needed. Luckily, when we turned to Albany, when we said we have to keep our people safe, we need this change in the speed limit, we had Speaker Shelley Silver on our side. He represents the district that we're in here. He understands the needs of people on the ground. He was quick to take up this challenge and make it happen. I've worked with Speaker Silver for a long time, and I can tell you that when we've been able to achieve great things, whether it's Vision Zero, whether it's pre-K, whether it's after school, time and time again, the City of New York has turned to Speaker Silver, and he has delivered for us and helped make this a better city. And I am eternally grateful for his support and for helping us to achieve this new speed limit. New York State Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for your kind words. It is fitting that we gather here on Delancey Street in my Lower East Side community, where tragically there have been a number of fatal accidents over the years, including the unthinkable loss of a 12-year-old, Dashana Santana, just a little under 2 years ago. Today we demonstrate our resolve to put an end to this senseless loss of life. Joining me this morning are my colleagues who represent this community, who were here during the days following the tragedy, and we all committed to make sure we do something about that tragedy. And I speak of my state senator, Senator Dan Squadron, our two great council members, Councilmember Margaret Chin and Councilmember Rosie Mendez, and someone who joined us later, the Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, who was here as well. I want to commend our great Mayor Bill de Blasio for his leadership in guiding us to this bill signing, to this moment for which so many of us throughout the city have been advocating for years. I have complete confidence Mr. Mayor, in your Vision Zero plan that it will make our streets safer. I also want to thank the Assembly sponsor of the legislation, Assemblyman Dan O'Donnell, who could not be here this morning, who worked tirelessly on behalf of this legislation. And I want to commend all of the members of the City Council who took up this legislation and passed this legislation. Has been a priority of some of the advocates who are here today, including and most importantly the families for safe streets. Earlier in the year, I met with a group of New Yorkers whose loved ones were struck and killed by dangerous drivers. Needless to say, their stories were heartbreaking. I promised these families we would pass legislation authorizing the city to lower the maximum speed on the vast majority of streets. We worked with our colleagues in the Senate. We kept the promise, and I'm proud to say that the Governor Cuomo, signed this bill that enabled the City Council legislation to take place in August. A victory? Absolutely. The challenge facing us remains difficult, and we will continue to act. Earlier this year, we gave the city the authority to install 120 more speed cameras in school zones. Just over the last decade, we have passed countless measures to discourage dangerous driving, banning cell phones and texting while driving, prohibiting U-turns within areas adjacent to schools, requiring motorists to yield the right-of-way to pedestrians and crosswalks where there are no traffic signals, just to name a few. All we are doing here is codifying common sense and consideration. Vision Zero is a big step in the right direction. So again, I want to thank you, Mayor de Blasio, for your leadership and for making this a priority for our great city. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to join the Speaker and acknowledge and Councilmember Rosie Mendez. I'd like to next call up the chief sponsor of this legislation in the City Council, and David Greenfield is someone who has worked on this issue for years. He often was a lonely voice, pointing out the dangers we face and the need for change. When we came into office, he was someone we turned to immediately to help act aggressively to save people's lives, and he has been a tremendous partner in this work. Councilmember David Greenfield.
Speaker, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our Speaker truly is our most progressive leader in Albany today, and we thank him for his leadership on this and so many important issues to the city. You know, today is really a unique day in New York City. It's a day where we will look back and proudly proclaim that today was a day that we passed legislation that saved lives. It's not something we do often here in the city of New York, but we're doing it today. By simply lowering the default speed limit to 25 miles an hour, we're reducing the risk of death of those who would otherwise get hit at 30 miles an hour in half. And this is literally the linchpin of Vision Zero that Mayor de Blasio promised when he ran for office, and to his credit, he kept that promise. And I want to repeat that because, especially those of us who work in politics and the press who covers us, you can understand that in this business, unfortunately, it's very easy to become cynical. There are many promises that are made that unfortunately are broken, but not with Bill de Blasio. Even before he was in office, his staff reached out. They asked us to work together. They made a commitment that they would make it happen, and they made it literally their top priority. But it quite literally takes a village to get things done in New York. First, it was the mayor, and I've been saying this the past few days. You can tell if a mayor is doing a good job not simply by his leadership, but by his selection of commissioners. And his selection of the DOT commissioner is really an outstanding selection, Commissioner Trottenberg, who's absolutely committed to the safety of all New Yorkers. And then, of course, here in the city, we had our speaker, Melissa Mark-Viverito. It was an incredible breath of fresh air. I will tell you that when I introduced the legislation 4 years ago, it took me 3 years to get a hearing. But this speaker, Melissa Mark-Viverito, is absolutely committed to getting this done. And we have two incredible chairs here in our city council. We have the chair of the Transportation Committee, Councilmember Udanis Rodriguez. We traveled together up to Albany to advocate on behalf of this piece of legislation. And of course, we have our Public Safety Chair, Vanessa Gibson, who literally, with Udanis, went borough to borough to travel and to discuss the importance of Vision Zero. And I see, of course, so many other of my colleagues, some of whom were recognized already, Councilmember Chin, Councilmember Mendez, Councilmember King, who's here with us as well. And of course, we have our heroes up in Albany. Little known fact is that Senator Marty DeLon sponsored this bill before anybody even took it seriously. And I want to thank him for his leadership as well. And of course, our local state senator, Dan Squadron, has been a proponent of Vision Zero and safety since he's been in office. And I want to thank Senator Hoyleman as well for his leadership. And finally, I really want to thank the advocates. We have professional advocates in the form of Transportation Alternatives, a wonderful organization that really works hard to try to make our streets safer. But we had non-professional grassroots advocates as well, and that was Families for Safe Streets. It's very difficult to really understand, and quite frankly, I can't even comprehend the loss that they went through. Anybody who's lost a loved one, and of course I have lost a loved one, but they have lost loved ones in really the most tragic way thinkable. Someone kisses their child on the way out and says, "Have a great day," and they never come home that day because a reckless driver mows down that individual. It's really something that is just not fathomable, and until you experience it, it's difficult to believe. And these are folks who, by all rights, they could have been upset, they could have sulked, they could have stayed at home, they could have simply said, "Hey, the system doesn't work and it's broken," but that's not what they did. They got together and they worked hard and they advocated, and their loved ones really inspired us to do what we're doing here today. And so I really have great respect for them. And then the final thing that I would just add is that there will be many other benefits that are less important than saving lives, but should also be recognized. When you drive slower, you can stop faster. That means there will be less accidents. And less accidents means that there's less traffic, because anyone who drives knows that accidents are the single greatest cause of traffic in New York City. It also means lower car insurance payments for you and literally for all New Yorkers. But really, today is about saving lives. And the Talmud tells us that whoever saves a life saves the world. And that's literally in the sense that it's the world of the friends and the family and the people who knew that person who passed away, but also figuratively because one person can, in fact, change the world. So today is a unique day. It's a day where we give thanks. It's a day to reflect on all those lives who were lost. It's a day of hope for the future that proves that when New Yorkers get together, we can truly do great things. Thank you very much.
We've had another great leader in the City Council who's forcefully moved a number of pieces of legislation that will help make people safer. Chair of the Transportation Committee, Udanis Rodriguez.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mayor, and all the commissioners, and my colleague also at the council. No, today we finished our first, I would call it the first step of Vision Zero. Today, with this bill already signed by the mayor, announcing today when we will be starting making the 25 miles per hour the speed limit in New York City, we have approved 13 bills related to Vision Zero. So this is the number 13 bill that the mayor and working together with all of us has approved and has made a new law in the New York City Council with the support, as the mayor said, from Albany. And I also want to recognize the support that we also got from Senator Klein. Without his support also, this also have major obstacles, especially at the Senate. But no, even though it took us a lot of time, especially for the Family for Safe Street, to build this coalition that we went to Albany, and we agree on the 25 miles per hour. The most difficult part right now is going to be the educational and the enforcement. And I'm calling on everyone to understand that the tone that we got from the most important leader in New York City, Mayor de Blasio, is we can achieve Vision Zero by 2024. We can reduce to zero. That should be our goal. The number of New Yorkers, the loved one that we lost, children, senior citizens, college students getting ready to get into a PhD program, working class, middle class, upper class. Probably this is like one of the areas where we've been affected, regardless on the socio-economic and the ethnic background that we have. So I just would like to say, all New Yorkers, let's get ready, because the education and the enforcement will be in place. But also we will continue moving all the legislation that are important on Vision Zero. Para mí es un placer estar aquí con el líder principal de la ciudad de Nueva York, Bill de Blasio, quien ha mandado un mensaje de que nosotros podemos reducir a cero los números de personas que queremos que mueren golpeados por vehículos. Hoy es un día nuevo, tenemos que trabajar con la parte educacional y todos saber que 25 millas por hora es la velocidad máxima de manejar en la ciudad de Nueva York. Gracias.
Before we sign the bill, it's fitting that the last speaker be someone who's put so much of her heart and soul and time and energy into achieving this progress. Amy Cohen is one of the leaders. There are many in Families for Safe Streets. There are many families who have suffered loss and, again, valiantly, in extraordinary manner, have put their energies into saving other lives. You can only imagine that they could have easily turned away. They would have had every right to. But they decided to stand up and fight, and it's making a difference for, in the future, I'm sure to say, thousands and thousands of New Yorkers whose lives will be saved because of this. I'd like to bring forward Amy Cohen.
A year ago, on October 8th, my son Sammy was struck and killed across the street from our home. Like Deschanais, who was killed on this very corner, Sammy, too, was nearly 13 and traveling by himself from school, as all New York City 8th graders do. If the driver had been going 25 miles per hour, Sammy and Deschanais would likely still be alive today. The change to a 25 mile per hour speed limit is a life-saving change. It is not about raising revenue. It is about saving lives. As the mayor pointed out, at 25 miles per hour, drivers have more time to react when the unexpected happens. And if a crash cannot be avoided, it's much less likely to be fatal. Last week, I went to a memorial service for 9-year-old Lucian Merriweather, whose mother, Anna, is here today. His future was so bright, and like my son, Sammy, he was poised to make the world even brighter. As Anna said, it could have been anyone, any one of you here today, any son, daughter, brother, sister, or friend. In a simple trick of timing, we are the unlucky ones, and our lives have been violently changed forever. As all of us here from Families for Safe Streets know all too well, life is fragile. We have all lost our hope, our light, our guiding compasses. We have lost the future that were our children. I am here today with others, and everyone should hold up your photo, to remind all drivers that when you get behind the wheel, you are wielding a multi-ton weapon. Please, for Sammy and Lucian and Seth and Asif and Ali and Ella and Ruby and Cooper and many others, please, I beg all drivers to slow down, save a life. Thank you.
I'd like all the families and all of my colleagues in government to join me for the signing of the bill.
Forget it. This is really general. Yeah. General. It's all down. It's, you know, all downhill from here. That's right. She'll be 4 in about 20 days. Wow. Yes, little Sylvia. How do you do? Brings home.
Really? Thank you.
Legislation is now law. Okay, we're going to take questions from the media first on this topic, then we'll take questions on other topics. Anyone who wants to stay is welcome to. Again, we're going to start with this topic. Sally. The penalties for going over the speed limit. Let's get that from Chief Chan and Polly Trottenberg. Want to come forward? Polly, you want to start?
And I think we need Chief Chan too. If you're caught with automated enforcement like a speed camera, it's $50, and I think the chief can speak if it's an officer.
Our officers will be monitoring the speed limit out there, but the actual fines will be adjudicated when they get to traffic court in reference to the speed summonses.
Jen? Louder, louder.
again, this is going to be officer's discretion. And in other words, the speed limit at 25 miles an hour, officers will be monitoring the speed and they'll be issuing summonses for speeding. But again, that doesn't mean that we cannot issue you a summons at 26 miles an hour. But again, we're going to be taking a look at the violators out there, and our preference is that if there's a person speeding at a higher level, we certainly will go after those individuals. But our precincts, our Transportation Bureau, and working in closely with the Department of Transportation, where they will be assigning those particular mobile units to address speed violations. They will be out there on November the 7th, and they're currently doing the enforcement right now.
And I think the bottom line on that, Jen, is, a speed limit's a speed limit. If you go above the speed limit, you are liable for a penalty. Again, the officer can use discretion. They might see someone go 24, 25, 26 down to 25 again and say that's just a minor variation. But if someone's going 26 miles an hour and veering back and forth on the road, officer has every right to give that person a ticket. It's all going to come down to discretion. If you go above the speed limit, you are liable for the penalty. Yes.
Mayor, in the past few months, there are a few fatal car accidents happened in this area and Chinatown, including one happened on Canal Street, where the speed has already been lowered to 25 in a pilot program. So one of the Chinese newspapers, the headline for that story is "Lowering speed didn't work." So what would you say to Chinatown people who have
I think that's with all due respect to that newspaper, I think that is a very inappropriate judgment on their part. And I think it's misleading. And I think when we're talking about matters of public safety, our friends in the media need to be a little more careful. There are many tools in the fight against reckless driving. The speed limit is one of them. Street design is another. Speed bumps are another. Speed cameras are another. Enforcement is another. Education is another. You need all these tools. No one said there's a magic bullet. But the fact is, if you post a lower speed limit and in one incident, God forbid, someone violates it and there's a death, that does not invalidate the value of the speed limit. The lower speed limit is a matter of scientific fact that it helps both to avoid crashes and, God forbid, there is an incident, that the impact of the crash is lesser at a lower speed limit. That's just fact.
Speed cameras be recalibrated to 25 starting on the 7th, or what's the threshold going to be in the date for that change?
Well, it's going to depend on the street, and Speaker Silver mentioned the legislation that passed in Albany. We're still in the process of ratcheting up to the full authorization of 140 cameras. So on some streets, yes, if the speed limit is lowered, the speed cameras will be recalibrated. On some streets that are already signed, we won't be making a change. And remember, for speed cameras, all those cameras are near the entrances to schools and only operational during times when the school is being used.
Rich?
Complaints from any groups or factions about the lowering of the speed limit, or has it been pretty much without a ripple?
I think people have evolved on this question. I was a city councilman, as you know, for 8 years, starting in 2002. And if you had asked me back then, I would have said a lot of people would have been resistant. I myself, had a car, drove my car frequently, knew a lot of people who drove cars. But I think what's happened is, over time, the toll that these crashes have taken has really affected the thinking of New Yorkers. I think when it became clear at the end of last year that the number of traffic fatalities was almost as high as the number of murders, I think that was an eye-opening moment. I think these individual stories have really grabbed at people. And think about, this is something Commissioner Bratton's spoken about, which I think is powerful. This city, over the last 20 years, done a miraculous job of bringing down crime, particularly bringing down murder. But when you then see another issue grow in its impact, you have to think, what is the best way to focus our public safety efforts? And Commissioner Bratton, again, was a very strong and early voice saying, this is a problem of similar magnitude. We've got to give it a lot more attention. So I think it's happened organically. I think people are sick of hearing these very painful stories of children lost, of seniors lost. I think people also, everybody, thinks there but for the grace of God go I. And they don't want to lose their child. They don't want to lose their father or mother or grandfather or grandmother. They don't want to take the chance that another life will be lost. So I have to say that the simple answer to your question is no. I go all over the city. I was riding the subway this morning. A lot of times people come up to me and talk. I haven't had a single person say this is the wrong thing to do.
Your Vision Zero plan calls for home rule over automated enforcement.
Louder.
Vision Zero plan calls for home rule over automated enforcement. You secured some gains last year, but not home rule. Will you be returning to Albany during the next session to secure home rule?
Yeah, I mean, this is a broad view I have, and with absolute respect, the Speaker has done an extraordinary job of working with us. And I think Speaker Silver is one of the reasons why the City of New York is able to achieve the things it needs to protect our people. But as a structural question, this is one of the areas where I think it would be more appropriate for the city to have more say over its own destiny, so we can serve our people even better. That's certainly something I'll continue to pursue. Michael.
For the commissioner.
Which commissioner?
Commissioner Trottenberg. I was wondering, is the city continuing to install countdown clocks at pedestrian crossings? I know this corridor is particularly dangerous, and they still seem to be using the older pedestrian lights. I just was curious what the progress report is on all that.
Yeah, I mean, we are every year trying to install a whole variety of technologies out there, countdown clocks, doing things like leading pedestrian intervals. So yes, and as the mayor mentioned, redesigning 50 intersections, increasing our camera enforcement. So obviously we have a whole suite of tools that we are going to each year, build upon the work we've done. And yeah, we know countdown clocks, particularly in areas like this, are very efficacious. So we'll be putting more in.
Okay, on topic. Anything else on where we got? Oh, sorry.
I want to ask the commissioner if you've noticed any difference in accidents in the slow zones or where the speed cameras are up already. Do you have enough data? Has the lower speed limit in those areas made a difference?
One thing we have seen with the speed cameras is that as soon as people get that first ticket, it has a real effect on their behavior. We've seen this in New York, and this has been shown actually nationwide. You get tremendous decreases in speeding. 20, 30, 40% in given areas. And look, as the mayor has mentioned, speeding is one of the leading causes of traffic fatalities. So we are going to be, look, our speed camera program really, up until this year, we only had a couple of cameras. Now we're going to be ratcheting up. We're going to be doing data collection at all the areas where we deploy the cameras. We know we're going to see big speed reductions, and we will also be tracking the crash data.
Okay, last call on topic. Last call.
You mentioned that pedestrian fatalities are down drastically. Overall fatalities are down. Bicyclist fatalities have about doubled over this past year. What's your administration doing on that?
Well, I'm going to speak. This is the question of bicycle fatalities, and I'll let you guys jump in as well. Look, we are addressing all elements of this challenge, and so you've seen there's been a huge increase in the amount of enforcement in terms of all elements of the picture. So when it comes to bicyclists who are hit by vehicles, which is historically the bigger problem, we are going to continue everything we've just said, including increased enforcement of speed laws and speed violations or turning violations, all of the above. But we also know there are some bicyclists who have acted inappropriately, and we've increased enforcement activity towards them. So this is going to be equal opportunity. Who wants to add?
I'll add, and then maybe I'll talk quickly, and then have the chief talk. Yeah, Stephen, you're right. And one thing we're discovering, look, we've made tremendous progress this year, but the progress is not. It's not simple and smooth, and we're very disheartened by what's happened on the cyclist front. And we've been really working with NYPD to up our educational efforts. And as the mayor said, we're really hoping lowering the speed limit in particular is going to be something very important when you have the impact of a crash with a cyclist. I know the chief will want to talk about their enforcement efforts.
The area that we're looking at, again, the fatalities in dealing with bicyclists has actually doubled this year, and that's an area we're very concerned about. And a key point is that the NYPD, Department of Transportation, and the advocacy groups, we met early in June, and we started an education campaign out there to reach out to our bicyclists out there as they come off the bridges and things of that nature. During the summer month, we actually had an initiative where the police department issued over 7,300 summonses. 4,300 of those summonses were directed at bicyclists. violations as riding on the sidewalk, going the wrong way, disobeying signs and things of that nature, signal lights and things of that nature. But also 3,200 of those summonses were written to motorists who are blocking the bike lanes, actually causing the bicyclists to go into traffic. So again, it was about 60% issued to bicyclists, 40% to motorists that were blocking those lanes. What I want to emphasize is that along with our Department of Transportation and the advocacy groups is that we want to encourage our bicyclists to wear helmets because the helmets make a difference. It reduces the injuries, and it certainly can be a difference between a concussion versus a skull fracture. So we encourage everyone to utilize bicycle helmets. Thank you.
Okay, we will go to off-topic. Andrew.
Mayor, can you tell us about the 5-year-old who was brought to Bellevue? Not only the child's condition, but is the child treated any differently? Is there pediatric isolation? Anything to mitigate for the fact that a kid might find this terrifying?
Yeah, there is. First of all, I will start by saying Bellevue is an absolutely extraordinary place. Spent a lot of time there the last few days. I was up on the isolation floor yesterday. These are just extraordinary professionals, and you're exactly right. They do approach children differently. There are pediatric ICU nurses who are specially trained to work with children. So there's a lot of sensitivity here to making sure we handle this child carefully. Look, at this moment, we know a few things, and then we'll know a lot more by the end of the afternoon. The child and mother, from what we know so far, very, very recently returned from West Africa. The child at first did not appear to have any symptoms. The mother has no symptoms whatsoever. So a lot of caution is being taken here to be careful. We will have test results in the course of the day. I'd like to caution probably late in the afternoon because there are some sensitivities, again, to how you handle a child. But so far, everything has been handled, again, according to protocol. We hope to have positive news, but in the event we don't, we know everything's been handled right. Again, we know the family has just gotten here, so in terms of retracing steps, that will be an easier process. But it's very important in these situations not to predict. It's one of the things I'm learning every day talking to the healthcare professionals. I can only say the fact that the mother shows no symptoms at all is a very encouraging sign. Mara.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, you've said repeatedly over the weekend that you and the governor were able to speak many times kind of about the ongoing situation. I mean, do you think that you played any role in convincing the governor to soften his stance on the quarantine? And can you help New Yorkers understand how those conversations and that communication between the two of you and others has led to the latest measures?
The governor and I talk a lot, as everyone knows. We've known each other almost 20 years. I don't think it's my job to tell you how someone comes to their decisions. As something you should ask him. But I think the fact is it's a very collegial relationship. The professionals as well, the two health commissioners, have been in constant contact. I think one of the things to acknowledge here is this is a ever-changing situation. And all levels of government are adjusting their strategies at all times. We have to be smart about how we do it. Again, what happened with Nurse Hickox was unacceptable and was unfair to her and disrespectful to a hero. That was not the smart way to do it. But there are ways to update our strategies that are thoughtful and careful and based on science. That's what we're endeavoring to do. The two health commissioners, city and state, are talking constantly, and I've watched them both in action. They are absolutely devoted to doing things based on science and based on the larger approach to this healthcare crisis. And one of the things that's come out in all this is the city and state are going to really play a leadership role here in terms of encouraging and supporting healthcare professionals who will go to the 3 affected countries. This is a security crisis of a different kind. And it's time for us to mobilize our forces, and not just the U.S. military, which is going to the 3 countries and will play a leading role, but our healthcare professionals as well. So we will be meeting with the healthcare community of the city to find out everything we need to do to facilitate, incentivize, support getting the maximum number of appropriate healthcare professionals to the front so we can get at this crisis.
Mr. Mayor, 2 questions. First, following up on the 5-year-old, during this process while your tests are being done, are any measures being taken at his apartment or other people being interviewed or things being quarantined there? And then secondly, since we had the first confirmed case Thursday of Dr. Spencer, has your city seen a spike in calls people calling 311 or calling their doctors or going to emergency rooms thinking they may have the disease?
I will refer the second question to the folks who run our emergency management system because I want them to give you very specific information. No spike has been reported to me or nothing so difficult that it couldn't be handled. As you know, a week ago, we were experiencing a number of false alarms. In many cases, they turned out to be malaria. I'm sure that is continuing, but I'll get to the exact numbers. In terms of the procedure right now, we are taking additional precautions, for example, tracing the steps of the family as a precaution. We, again, well may find out in a matter of hours that there is no cause for alarm, but we are retracing the steps because it's a prudent thing to do right now, and we're in a position where we can create additional measures if we need to.
So. Two questions also. One, you mentioned you were in the isolation unit. Can you just tell us what precautions you yourself took, what you wore, anything like that?
Well, the isolation unit at Bellevue is separated into separate sections. The sections in which someone can enter without any exposure, as I did, do not require protective gear. They do a number of protocols as a matter of control. There's checkpoints you have to go through to get in, so you have to be authorized several times before you can go in. Your name and contact information is taken. Obviously, if you've had any kind of illness or something, you're supposed to report it. On the way out, your temperature is taken and recorded. So there's a set of checks and balances along the way. But the areas in which I went with my wife, Shirlane, were secure areas where there was no exposure to disease. There were several more stages after that. The elaborateness of the protocols is absolutely extraordinary. We were shown one of the rooms that would be usable in the event there was an additional patient. There are chambers after chambers leading into the room. There's elaborate audio and video systems. They can keep in constant dialogue with the patient even if there is not medical personnel in the room. So I have to say it's just extraordinary to watch, and as I was there, I mentioned yesterday, they were on the phone conference call with experts at Emory University in Nebraska reviewing the treatment plan for Dr. Spencer. You know, when you're there on that floor, it feels like the center of the universe. That is the front line of all front lines in terms of what's happening in this country. And the professionalism is just extraordinary. So it was a real honor to be with them.
Can we just quickly get an update on Dr. Spencer's condition and his fiancée? Is she still symptom-free?
As last reports I've received, and as you know, we always have to get updated reports, but the last reports I have received, the fiancée and the two friends are still symptom-free. The last I've heard, Dr. Spencer, serious but stable as he was yesterday.
This is Corey, ABC News. I'm sure that there are many New Yorkers who'd rather not go to a bowling alley or a movie theater and sit next to someone who's been taking care of Ebola, like Dr. Spencer. So why are healthcare workers who are taking care of Dr. Spencer at Bellevue not subject to the same mandatory quarantine?
I think this is a misunderstanding that really needs to be addressed. And I appreciate your question because I do think it represents what people would feel. But we don't give in to our fears. If there's any people on this earth who don't give in to fear, it's New Yorkers. So I want to urge all my fellow New Yorkers, pay attention to the facts. Don't give in to fear. Don't give in to hype. So let me explain. The personnel at Bellevue right now go through, by the way, extraordinary training for this kind of situation. They've gone through specific training for Ebola. They take extraordinary precautions. They then, at the end of their shift, go home to their communities. The only way that there would even be a cause for concern is if one of them were to have any symptoms. To date, none have. The medical personnel who cared for the American doctors, the very beginning of this crisis, the American doctors who were in West Africa, stricken there, didn't come over here and suddenly develop symptoms. They were stricken there in a more advanced state. They came back. A whole community of healthcare professionals cared for them. Those doctors were cured. Those professionals lived in their communities. The professionals who have cared for the nurses, who now, thank God, are better. We've got to be clear. We've got to demystify this. People taking proper precautions, caring for these patients, are not a threat to anyone else. And if we treat heroic people who are serving us like there's something wrong with them, we do a disservice to the fight against Ebola. Hold on. Louder. Spencer?
Sorry, Fred Spencer, he probably would say he did take all the proper precautions and he came back, and now if a week later, he would now be under mandatory quarantine. So what's the difference between him and these healthcare workers?
It's a fair question, but listen to the logic again. Hundreds and hundreds of American healthcare professionals have served people with Ebola. In Atlanta, in Nebraska, in Dallas. The folks who did that over and over again overwhelmingly had no symptoms, did not contract the disease, went on about their life. The very few who have been exposed, which is Dr. Spencer and 2 nurses. Dr. Spencer is in the middle of treatment. The 2 nurses are now recovered because they had the benefit of Western medicine. So by any normal logic and by the numbers, the vast majority of people in this context of this country's healthcare system who provided care had no negative impact from providing care, went on about their lives, interacted with their families and community. There's been no consequence. There's been very few instances otherwise, and in the case of the 2 nurses, they quickly recovered. So we've got to look at this in context. We've got to stop making this more than it is. This disease, and this is crucial, there are other diseases, very dangerous diseases that are easily contracted. By the way, the isolation ward at Bellevue was created to address the AIDS crisis and created to address a tuberculosis outbreak related to the AIDS crisis, and that was a disease that was airborne and dangerous for that reason. This is not an airborne disease. This is a disease that can only be passed by intimate contact with bodily fluids, which is why you have not seen it grow in any meaningful way here. Go ahead, Courtney.
Mr. Mayor, can we get an update on the child's mother? Is she with him?
Yes.
Should she be subject to any type of quarantine? And then I also think this raises the question of people that are coming back from these countries that aren't medical professionals but have had some sort of contact with people with this virus. Is there any question about quarantining these people, and how would you conduct?
Well, Courtney, that's what the new state rules do. So let's go over this. Couple of different pieces now. First, on the mother, yes, she is with the child, again, being treated in a similar manner as a precaution, no symptoms, but by definition, we want her with the child because we want the child to have the support of his mother. We'll have more to say at the end of the afternoon. In terms of what's happening now, the CDC mandated that starting today, there be monitoring of anyone who returned, whose information was gathered by the screening process put in place at the airports roughly 2 weeks ago. We've been provided with most of those names, not all, but we're continuing to get additional names. The City of New York is monitoring each and every one of those returnees, and these are people who reported no contact with the disease or with anyone with the disease. But CDC rules, which we respect, mandate local health authorities to monitor. We're in daily touch with those individuals as we make contact with them, and we will be for a 21-day period, meaning someone arrives today, had no contact with anyone with Ebola, but they arrived from one of those 3 countries, we'll stay in touch with them daily for 21 days. If someone arrived 10 days ago, we'll stay in touch with them for the next 11 days. Once you pass 21 days, if there's no symptoms, that's the end of the sequence, and that person is considered safe. The new quarantine rules initiated by the state. Details still being determined. The 2 health commissioners in case of New York City, Mary Bassett, will work with Howard Zucker, her state counterpart, to work out the details of how it will be implemented here in the city with flights coming into JFK. But the broad strokes are this. Anyone who did not come in contact with an individual with Ebola, either as an individual citizen or as a medical professional, they go home as normal, but they're subject to the monitoring the CDC has mandated. And again, we will perform that. City of New York will perform that monitoring. But if someone has been in contact with someone with Ebola, of course, the first thing that will happen is they will be checked for any immediate symptoms. If there are immediate symptoms, they'll be taken to the emergency room. If there are no symptoms, the state is implementing a quarantine at home, as the governor described last night. But that is a quarantine in which there will be monitoring twice a day by health professionals, but it's a quarantine that allows family members and friends to visit with the returning healthcare professional. It's meant to make clear that we have the ability to contact the person and keep touch with their healthcare condition daily, But we're also respecting the fact that these are heroes who are fighting for us against this disease and need an opportunity to have a proper reentry to this country. That's the balance that's being struck here. And again, the City of New York will provide the monitoring for those individuals. Please.
Just to clarify, this pertains to people that are healthcare workers as well as just, let's say, regular citizens that went to a wedding.
So separating the two, I'm glad you asked the question. An individual citizen or a healthcare worker who says, I have been in contact with someone with Ebola while in one of the 3 countries is immediately checked for symptoms. If there are symptoms, immediately taken to emergency care. If there are no symptoms, home quarantine. Or, as the governor explained last night, if they are not going to a home, we will find an alternative facility that's appropriate. But if someone has not been in direct contact, they go about their lives, but we, the City of New York, will monitor them daily.
Mayor, going back to the 5-year-old, thank you. What led somebody to make a 911 call to get an ambulance there in the first place? And were there symptoms involved? Was the boy showing some sort of symptoms initially?
Again, we have to respect the privacy of all patients, so I'm going to speak in very broad strokes. I think the child was having some difficulties, but it's not clear they were the kinds of symptoms that would be related to Ebola. So, again, this is the abundance of caution dynamic. Very recently returned family, the child was showing some signs of an illness, not clear what the illness was. We did the cautious thing and brought the child in under the full protocol. We'll know at the end of the day. It may turn out we have something here, or it may turn out the child is sick with something totally different, and obviously the child will continue to receive care for that.
What's going on in the Bronx in terms of any decontamination, and what is this costing the city to do this additional monitoring that's now being mandated by the CDC?
So on the first, you mean when you say in the Bronx, you mean on this case? Again, we don't have evidence that we have a case of Ebola, so it would not be appropriate to do any further decontamination until you know that. What we're doing is, first and foremost, taking care of the child and mother. Maybe a totally different health care challenge. So either way, the folks at Bellevue are going to address the mother and the child's needs. We're already retracing the steps, so we'll have that ready. And then upon determining if there's something more, we'll act. But that's something, again, we should know in the course of this afternoon. What was your second question?
It was on the costs for the city for all the additional monitors.
Look, in a crisis, obviously, we are focused on doing what we have to do to keep our people safe. So cost is something we don't worry about when it comes to keeping our people safe. This is the priority of this government right now to address this crisis. Most of what we're doing in monitoring we can do with our existing Department of Health staff. They can be augmented with our Office of Emergency Management staff, and we've also gotten a lot of cooperation not only from our public health system, our public hospital system, but also from the voluntary hospitals. So we have the personnel necessary to address this crisis now with the resources we have.
Mr. Mayor, right now we have one patient. What would happen if the worst case scenario happened and this really became an outbreak in which several patients had Ebola? What's the capacity of this city to handle these cases? How many cases could we handle?
Well, look, right now we're dealing with current realities as we've seen them here and around the country. So every question is fair and is expressing the concerns of the people, and I appreciate it. But I want to put this in perspective again to answer your question. In Dallas, everyone related to the situation in Dallas has been very upfront and admirably honest about what went wrong. Here was a case that wasn't handled right. The gentleman, Mr. Duncan, clearly had symptoms, was sent home to a family. That family spent time around Mr. Duncan. Some of them cared for him directly. When he was finally brought back to hospital care, the family was quarantined. 21 days in quarantine, every single member of that family came out safe. So here are people who had intimate and prolonged contact with someone with full-blown Ebola, and none of them were affected. So we got to put in perspective, we don't see right now a context for that kind of spread. What we know for sure, every city hospital has been prepared. 5 hospitals in the city have been designated as specially able to handle Ebola, leading with Bellevue. Each of them has capacity. So for everything we can foresee at this moment, we have sufficient capacity for sure. But again, there's no evidence of a pattern of spreading here that would cause us to have a greater concern. The 5 hospitals have substantial capacity. Obviously, to the great credit of the healthcare community of this city, all elements of our hospital system have offered up personnel as needed, so we'll have sufficient personnel, and we're ready to handle this situation. Thanks, everyone.